Two. Oh, waiting for there we go. There we go. Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the BrisPug stream. So today we're going to be basically doing a bit of. I hope you guys can hear me okay. I'm just going to quickly check before I do anything. Streams. Yep. Cool. All right. So today we're going to basically be doing a live stream, which is a replay that I've done in terms of a BrisPug talk that I did last year, December last year. On the introduction of PowerShell, REST within PowerShell. So it's a bit of an introduction, as well as it's got some advanced features in there that we just kind of tack in there to help you guys out. So with obviously any further ado, let's get started. So I think the first thing is obviously we've got a bit of a PowerPoint deck. So this is the deck that we've been used during the presentation. There's bits and pieces in here that are just not going to apply in terms of what we're actually having in what we're actually needing to mention, because it's basically topic content that's pertained to BrisPug. So we're basically just going to be jumping straight into the keynote and have a little bit of chat around that. So let's get started. So if we go next, obviously BrisPug sponsored by Hudson Recruitment, Ironman Software, and Insync Technology. So if you guys go check them out. Hudson Recruitment's really good. My mates at Hudson are really generous in hooking me up. At the same time, obviously Ironman, Adam was really nice of us to provide for this specific scripting games a free license to Universal Dashboard. And in conjunction with that, we basically have Insync Technology, which is I just literally have multi-factor authentication in there. It's a managed service provider that basically really focuses on the modern workplace. So they've I personally work at Insync, but basically what we focus on is a lot of we deliver Microsoft products to our customers, which focus on cutting bleeding edge technologies. So things like Skype for Business Teams. We've got obviously any Azure products, so like Intune, things like that. I work in identity and automation, so I deliver a focus more on identity automation. So I'm basically run the scripting side of things, and with my colleague Alex. So we basically do, Alex does a lot more MIM, and I'll basically do a little bit more PowerShell, but basically we're pretty much both versed in technologies. So yeah, that's pretty much that. Obviously news, this is fairly old, so we've got compatible module DSCs now on AWS, things like that. We don't need to talk about that. One thing worth mentioning is YAML. So if you guys are not sure what YAML is, it's just another markup language, but it's very similar to JSON. It's obviously a lot of people going to YAML, so it's worth checking out just to see what the big fuss is about. But I'm like, at the end of the day though, like in terms of markup, serializing, deserializing against a markup language, I'm generally like, as I'll use what I need to use. So if it's something quite complex, I'm going to use ClayXML. Whether it's something quite simple, I'm going to use JSON or YAML, things like that. So keep in mind though, YAML doesn't JSON. I'm pretty sure JSON, any sort of REST API doesn't support YAML unless it's explicitly defines the documentation. That's something that's just worth noting if you have questions about that. So we don't need to talk about the scripting games. Obviously, Adam was really nice of us to provide a license for that. So obviously that's passed. And we're going to get stuck now into using REST with PowerShell. So as you guys can see in the background there, I've just got what we call a Phillips Hue light. If you guys are not familiar with what Phillips Hue is basically a home automation system that allows you to do like programmatically control your lights. So the way that it uses it's got a little hub, which basically needs to so I just had a fun thought. Basically have a hub that allows us to do some like allows you to control your lights, and the way it uses it is basically uses whatchamacallit. I just realized it's probably not going to work from down there because the signal's not going to reach. I'm going to try something. I'm just going to try to see if it can reach it. I don't know if it can. Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay. Oh, hang on. So I'm just having a bit of a worry moment here at the moment. I'm just a little concerned that the hub can't talk to my thing. My hub's downstairs, so that's why I'm kind of trying to work this out. I didn't really think of that. Yeah, I don't think it's talking to it. Yeah, failed to activate the widget. Okay. I'm just going to open up the app. So the way Hue works is it basically uses, let's try this. Unable to connect. Okay. That's a good start. I'm just going to ping it. The way that it works is it basically uses a REST-based interface, which you can interact with the hub, and then from that basically you can basically then send your REST API statement or your queries to it, and it can do things. So I think I'm having trouble with this. I'm just seeing if I can actually get to my queue. It's 200.9. It's trying to connect to it. Can I ping it? I'm just going to try and ping it first, because I might have just done something. I think I've unplugged it. 1 second. I'm just going to go downstairs and turn it on. Okay, sorry about that. So basically, yeah, my wife had it unplugged. She was doing some vacuuming downstairs, so that was the reason why for that network outage. So basically, as you can see, I'll just use my phone. This is actually really cool because this is basic. Hue Phillips Hue is powered by Zigbee, so it's a standard it allows for wireless communication between your lights. As you can see, if I turn that off and turn it back on, we can see that's actually downstairs and it's going through a couple of walls, which is actually really impressive. So now I know the ranges of it. I can actually probably even put some lights upstairs here, which is really cool. I didn't think I could do that. So yeah, didn't even know. So from that, basically, let's get started. So I am probably going to have to go tear downstairs because I'm going to need to go press a button, but I have 15 seconds to go for a fast run. So I might even need to open up the door and get that ready. So let's get stuck into it. So first thing, obviously, this is a bit of an agenda, a bit of a breakdown of what we're actually talking about. So what is REST? What is JSON? We're going to basically do a bit of a HTTP breakdown, understanding what HTTP is, using REST, and some demos. So in these demos, basically, we're going to be looking at using obviously Phillips Hue, but at the same time, we're going to be using at the same time, I'm going to actually also demo what production code looks like when you're using REST with PowerShell. So that's another thing that you guys can have a bit of a look at and provide, and you guys can ask questions on why I did ways I did it. So let's keep going. So what's REST? REST is basically, in short, is what we call a representational state of transfer. It's basically what it is. It's a web service architecture that's based on HTTP. It's based on HTTP. Really, it's just a it's a method that allows you to do any. Hang on. Let me go back. I've actually totally. Oh, there's my notes. Cool. I've kind of need to put some notes in here, so that's fine. Give me 2 seconds. Yeah, just slow. Just F5 that. Okay, perfect. Okay, so we rest. Okay, yeah. So it's an open source architecture that was used by APIs to interact with. It was developed in parallel with HTTP 1.1 from HTTP 1.0. There are some constraints that you need to be aware of. That basically there's a client-server architecture. So there's obviously it's will since there's a separation of the two, user interfaces are basically going to have security issues. It's stateless, so no client context is used when storing between a server on between a request. So if you're using any sort of any sort of authentication or things like that, it really should be using like JSON Web Tokens and things like that for token membership. It's cacheable, so HTTP allows the use of cacheability. It provides, obviously that increases performance. It has a lot of layability. So if you have your HTTP, it's obviously you can load balance that, so that's basically on top of your. It's leveraging that protocol to be able to make it more highly available. Obviously, it allows proxying and caching and things like that as well. And it's obviously a uniform interface. It allows the use of services like JSON and XML, and obviously authentication services like OAuth and OAuth 2.0, simplifying the endpoint. Now, one of the things I will talk about in terms of authentication is that it is the Wild West out there. You're going to see, for example, with Phillips Hue that has a physical base press of authentication, where other products out there, such as like obviously Microsoft Graph, for example, that would use OAuth 2.0. That's a good standard. Another API that I've recently used is Desire to Learn, or D2L, that used an arbitrary authentication called Valance. And basically, Valance was all REST-based. It's all URL key values that were basically passed in the URL of the get of the request. Things like that, basically. Yeah, it is the Wild West out there. So while this is like, it sounds all nice and it's neat and it's nice and neat, it can get pretty wild out there in terms of what people do for their authentication. I've seen some absolute doozies. So yeah, I'm not going to say stand by that, but that's basically a really nice architecture idea for that. It's a nice little package of way to deliver a sales pitch, if you would say. So the next thing we've obviously got is what is JSON. So I want to talk about what is JSON, because in this instance we're going to actually be using JSON to interact with my Phillips Hue API item in the background. So basically JSON is it's basically it's short for JavaScript object notation. It's an open source standard, like it uses clear readable text to transmit data between two objects. So a good example is YAML, XML, those kinds of those kinds of markup languages that allow that kind of the clear text, the allow of data to be sent over clear text to an endpoint. In this instance, JSON and XML are the primary ones. Some of them are picking up YAML, but it's really kind of, like I said, JSON's generally the primary in this one. You basically can serialize and deserialize in PowerShell by using convert to and convert from JSON. So as you can see in this bit of a demo here, I've got just got invoke res method, prevent blah blah get. And then basically I have a body here, so I'm just obviously doing a get, and then I'm converting it to JSON. So I'm converting it from JSON. So that's convert to and convert from JSON are really useful, especially for serializing, deserializing. Yeah, cool. I think that, g'day, hello viewer. Hope you stick around. It's so yeah. Following that, basically, I think the next thing I'm going to do is give you a quick demo of it. So what we can do is just create a new file. So if you're not familiar with JSON, it's fairly basic. You can serialize, what we call serialize in JSON quite easily. So you basically can build an object within PowerShell, and then that object will just be using that commandlet to basically serializing it. Oh, thanks for that. So within that, what we need to do, I need to actually change it so I can actually read it. PowerShell. So what we can do is, so we're serializing JSON. So we can create our object. So you can use PS objects, you can use hash tables, anything like that. I generally stick with hash tables. It's just kind of personal preference, but there's no real difference between any of them. Convert to and from JSON will just serialize as it goes. It's a bit like if you ever use C Sharp, C Sharp will generally everyone uses Newtonsoft to basically serialize and deserialize JSON. It's pretty much the same thing. Newtonsoft just takes whatever you give it, and provided that it has the schema correctly defined, it'll just do it. So there are some caveats with it. So obviously, one of the really cool things I love about converting to and from JSON, especially to JSON, is you can specify what we call the depth. So if you've got a really deep object where you've got properties inside of properties inside of properties inside of properties, sorry, objects within objects within objects within objects and properties inside of properties there, and you don't particularly want to have that object serialized, you can basically specify the depth of how deep it can go. Because serializing JSON is quite an arduous process. So you kind of, generally the default's set to 3, so you can kind of go, oh right, if it's 3 and I need to have an extra layer, I might just set the depth to 4. But at the end of the day though, you can kind of just you can obviously adjust it. So let's create our object. So I'm just going to use a hash table, so we can just go like so. Oh, it helps if I can actually type. So let's say I'm just going to call it property 1. Property 2, property 3. Okay, so we've got our hash table. If we just run that, let's just run that. Yeah, that's fine. And we can just dump out. You can actually. Oh, did that actually execute? I don't think I ran it. PowerShell does not support debugging of this type JSON. Oh, I think I didn't actually. Rename this. Okay, let me just quickly sort this out, because I actually just said it was JSON, so I'm just going to go this one. There we go. Alright, so if we dump out hash table, you can see I've got our hash table key values. It works with same with object property as well. So, and what we can do is just go convert to JSON, like so, and obviously you can see now this text is what we define as JSON. We can actually validate that, and what we can do is we can just fire up Google, and you can just go to JSON validator. Oh, look at that! That's really cool. DuckDuckGo's got it. They always keep adding cool stuff. So you can see it's JSON's valid. So, and the way what we can do now is we can actually deserialize that. So what we can do here, I'm just going to wrap this inside a string. It helps if I'm hitting the right keys, and if so if we run this, we can see that we have a string. You can see that, and now if we can actually deserialize. So if we convert from JSON, there's our key values. One of the really important things about converting to and from JSON, it's not the same as converting it to client XML and from client XML. Client XML stores type information where JSON doesn't really. So what I mean by that is if you basically do, for example, you've got a custom object, or let's say you go get process. I'll show you a good example. So if you get process, we do a get member on get process, you can see that the type is system.diagnostics.process. So that type will not be preserved when you serialize the JSON. All it's going to preserve is the property type, the property type. So if it's an array, if it's a collection, things like that, it doesn't care. It just sees it as that. So when you're serializing back, this is where Newtonsoft is much better at it. You can actually specify the type So if you've got for example, a class that's defined as system.diagnostics.process in C#, you basically serialize the response back into that. It would actually cast it as that type. Where if you do that within PowerShell, it's just going to cast it as a generic PS object. So it's really important to understand that when you're doing these kinds of things, that your typecasting is going to be different. Most of the time it's not going to matter. However, there are some times when it will matter. One of the things that's, if you do want to preserve the type, use CLI XML. So basically that's when you're converting to and from. However, when you're doing that, basically there's no REST API interfaces out there that supports that. So you kind of, when you're basically dealing with this, you're kind of going to be in a bit of a pickle when if you're wanting to try and cast a response as a type object. You could obviously use Newtonsoft if you really wanted to in PowerShell, but obviously your best method would be to basically build a function, iterate through each of the properties, and then custom build out that object again. Whether that object's a PS a PowerShell 5 class, or whether that's a PS custom object with custom things, you basically need to build in essence a class with a constructor to do that. Does that make sense? All right. Let's keep going. So we're obviously yeah, let's just keep going. So the next thing I want to talk about is HTTP, and obviously a bit of a breakdown about HTTP. So let me just bring back and go back to HTTP. Oh, we're going right back. Okay. Okay. Yep. Here we go. So HTTP. So I want to kind of talk a little bit about what HTTP is, or like kind of I'll talk about the key elements of HTTP. Sorry. So obviously, what we've got here is URI. So URI, you hear people talk about URI, URLs. URI basically stands for a uniform resource identifier, and all it is, it's an identifier. Basically, you can have a construct of a URL underneath it. It's not really that special. HTTP headers. HTTP headers are basically key value pairs that describes the parameters of the HTTP request. So in this instance, you would have, for example, like accept encoding. Accept encoding is these headers are basically predefined by a HTTP standard. So you have things like accept encoding, authorization. They're generally the two most common ones, because most of the time when you're doing some sort of REST request, you're going to be you need to tell the HTTP server what your body of your content is going to be, whether it's JSON, whether it's XML. You also need to tell it who am I, so what my authorization is, so things like that, and that's where you use OAuth and OAuth 2.0. Basically, HTTP headers, they're just key value pairs that you just you specify to describe what the context of the body is. Like I said, obviously, we've got the accept encoding one, so that can basically be XML, UTF-8, ASCII, things like that. So what is it? It's accepting the authorization. So you got OAuth and OAuth 2.0. I am going to briefly touch on these because basically these are really important. So OAuth authentication is simply put is just your traditional kind of username password, except that the way that OAuth works is OAuth doesn't actually you wouldn't actually specify your username and password. You would use something like you would use like a token that would be generated. So it'd be just like a key value token. So there's nothing special about it. It's just basically, it looks at it and goes, okay, that's it. It just compares it, it treats it as a password. These OAuth tokens, whether that's OAuth or OAuth 2.0, they do have expiries. So basically you need to be wary of that. Over time they will be expired and you need to go get a new one. Regarding that, we'll talk about refresh tokens in a moment, but that's another thing we need to chat about. Then we have OAuth 2.0, and OAuth 2.0 is a more secure version. The reason why is it provides a multi-step authentication process where the user actually has to allow the access to the machine. So when you see on your phone or something like that, and you have, does it want to request access to access your files and folders? That's basically OAuth 2.0. And you physically granting access to be able to log onto that endpoint via an API. So OAuth 2.0 has that physical authorization, and that's much better because basically for people, they can obviously reject it, and obviously that API will fail. So the way that OAuth 2.0 basically also has in terms of security is it doesn't actually issue, in essence, a what we call it doesn't issue just a value. It will issue what we call a JWT token, or a JavaScript web token, a JSON web token, JavaScript web token. And so what it does is basically a JavaScript web token has two segments. It has the top segment which describes the user. So the user, like if we're talking about a Microsoft instance, you'd have the user principal name, you would have when the token was issued, when the expiry time is, and all that stuff is all in clear text, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no passwords. It's basically it's just an identity for that specific user. Where the security comes from is that basically the web token is also wrapped with underneath is a validator, and what that validator is it's an encrypted copy of the top level of text. So what it means is that, let's say I take a web token from somebody else and I make it for myself. Well, unless I know the key and be able to decrypt the bottom half of the token and adjust that, it's just not going to work. So the way that it validates the token is the server will decrypt the bottom segment of the text, compare it to the top segment, and if it's the same, then obviously allow that the token is valid. But if it's different, then some adjustments has taken place. That's basically a bit of an overview. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but in essence, it's similar to when you're signing a PowerShell file, when you're signing any sort of script signing, anything like that. So like when you sign a PowerShell file, you have the top part of your PowerShell, it's still in clear text, and then the bottom part is basically encrypted. So when that file, let's say I adjust the script, now the signing's changed. So when the script runs on a machine that basically can only run PowerShell scripts that requires signed scripts, it will look at the bottom half of the script according to the certificate that's provided and go, and then check whether it's valid, and if it's not valid, it'll actually invalidate it. So these are basically how this works in terms of how OAuth 2.0 is a little bit more secure in that sense. The body. So we'll talk about the body. The body is basically the data bytes that's being transmitted to the destination that contains the data. Now that's on send and receive. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But basically, when you have the request method. The request method basically defines what kind of HTTP requests there are. So there's a couple of them out there. So you've got the get, which basically everyone knows. You do a HTTP get to Google, and you're going to get the Google's homepage. If you do a put, that's basically the equivalent of an update or a replace. A post is a create, and a patch, a delete is a delete, and a patch is partial update or modify. Sounds like a lot, but it's quite the best that you really kind of need to know the four, which is get, put, post, and delete. Patch kind of does fall in there sometimes, but most of the time it doesn't. So now you have your we will talk about our methods. So then we're going to talk about our status codes. So status codes describe the server response. So if you've got a 200s, they're okay. 300 is usually your redirects. 400 is your client error. And 500s are, I can't even remember what 500s are. I don't even have them on the note. I know there's 500s, but I can't remember what they are. But basically, so for example, you've got obviously the most common out there, everyone knows 404, which is basically the resource cannot be found. Now, within a REST API, I don't want you to mistake that for saying the server is not working. In a REST API, when you see a 404, it means if you're doing a lookup for a specific user, it's saying, hey, I'm not there. Like the user does not exist. So when people see 404, they think, oh, server's down. No, 404 doesn't mean server's down. 404 means the resource that you're looking for is unavailable. So that's really important to kind of get your head around. Hello viewers, hello extra viewers. Hope you stick around. Obviously the next one is 403, forbidden. So for 403s are generally going to be the ones that you're going to see when you have your you have any sort of authentication issues. So if it's the web page is not authenticated, anything like that, that's basically what you're going to get back. When you see 403s in a REST API interface, basically what you're looking at there is what you is your authentication process has failed. So that's something that they keep in mind with. 407, the bane of my existence in any sort of REST API is proxy authentication. That like that drives me nuts. We've had so many issues at work when we've basically deployed a product and we have a proxy that's basically sitting out there. And this is not even a transparent proxy. This is just a proxy sitting there with an actual, you need a wpack file that doesn't work properly. And those are the ones that drive me absolutely bonkers. Then you also have 401, which is forbidden requires authentication. Actually just made a bit of a mistake there. So 403s are forbidden. Now that is actually just reminded me. 403, okay, it really, like I said, it really depends what's out there in the Wild West. But 403s can obviously mean access, whether your token has failed. But some of the time, or most of the time, what the standard would be basically would be the fact that 403 means it means the scope or whatever your resource you're trying to access, whether you're trying to access an admin area or something like that, you don't have access to it, so it revokes it. 401 requires authentication. That's the big one to remember. So if you see a 401, that's the one. Sorry, I was looking through my notes and I realized 401 was down the bottom and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's pretty much your status codes, and we talked about the body a little bit there. Okay, so I'm just going to chat a little bit more about this. So we kind of talked a little bit about the, obviously I talked about the body, and I was going to talk a little bit about the methods again. Was it the methods? I believe it was the methods. Whoops. Yes, the methods. So I'm kind of going to, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up Paint. Actually, no, we can just use, white paint, whatchamacallit, whiteboard. Microsoft Whiteboard. So what we can do is I'm just going to quickly take you through. This is one of my other projects I'm working on. I'm just going to scroll down here. So basically, I'm going to kind of take you through how the whole process works. Oh, sorry about IT. I did see your comment. Yes, you're correct. The server errors is another one as well. But in this instance, one of the yeah, actually no, that is correct as well. So with regards to we have our, we're going to quickly go through how a HTTP request goes in terms of we're going to do a login into Gmail. This is really rudimentary. I'm not going to be breaking down the exact body of the request and what encoding has been used and so on and so forth. But I'm just kind of trying to explain that the illustration between how a GET, POST, and those kinds of things work. So we've got our client here. I'm just going to mark it. I'm actually just going to draw that with I know there's a text thing in here. We've got our client in here. So if I go add text, so what we can do is drag him there. Got him there. Sweet. So we've got our client in place. Next thing is we obviously need to talk to the server. So I'm just going to see if I can copy that, which actually I should be able to. I'm just going to go server like so. I'm just going to draw a nice box around it. So when we do our initial request to the server, so client goes to the server, and we're going to pretend this is Google. What's going to happen here is we're going to basically do what we call a GET. So if we're going to do a GET. So basically we're getting the data. Whoops. Let's see if I can actually grab it. So once we've got the data, we're basically doing a GET. Now the server's going to basically see that, and what it's going to do is it's going to do a post back, or what we call post back. Does it post? No, it's actually just going to send the data back. So it's going to send the data back. So we've got our guest, we've got our, and then let's say inside the body, basically we're just saying, hey, it's google.com. That's all we want. Then the HTML bot, the HTML that the server will send, well, the HTML will be sent in the body back from the server. So the HTML will basically just be your kind of This is my terrible HTML. So from that, basically the server, the client will now say, let's say I want to log in. So it's going to go, let's say we're going to go to the login page. It's going to do the same process again. So it's going to do a get, and then obviously HTML is going to come back. Following that, obviously, we now have our login forms. Now within that, basically that response from the server, you're going to see all those extra, it's going to contain all the information of where to send a post request to, how to log in. It's going to give the browser that information. So when the information comes back to the server, so when the user clicks log in, inside the body of the login form, it's going to basically create, in essence, the username and password. It's going to craft that up nicely. And what it's going to do is it's going to do a post. So what that post will do is, if we just put up a nice post there, that post will basically go to the server with containing the login information. Now, that basically, as you can see, when any sort of data is being sent to the server, we send it inside a post. Now it can go inside of patches and other things like that, but predominantly in this instance, a login's done through post. There was a TechNet article, this is back in the day when I was using learning this. It actually showed you how to log in Facebook using web request, and it's really good because invoke web request because it taught you how to push and pull, how to adjust fields, and occasionally from time to time, if I need to manipulate something, I'm going to use invoke web request and then just update the form fields and then just do a post back. So it's worth noting, but that's basically a bit of a breakdown. I wish I had a whiteboard because then I could actually draw it out a little bit more, and I don't have. I'm doing it on a mouse is a little bit difficult, but in essence, basically, you're just using different methods and just encoding. Obviously, when you're sending a post back to the server, you're actually inside the body of that HTTP request, you're putting the login details with it, and that's obviously whether that's done clear text, whether you're assigning it, whatever. That's basically done. So that's pretty much that. Let's go back to our slide deck. So we've talked about that. Using REST and PowerShell. So I talked about invoke REST method, invoke web request just before. When we're using REST and PowerShell, we use invoke REST method. Obviously, invoke REST method has introduced in PowerShell 3.0. And then obviously it's undergone significant improvements. In PowerShell core now, it supports pagination, so we don't have to basically deal with if there's more than one request that needs to be made to compile a list of objects or of users, whatever. Basically that it will do that for us automatically without us having to deal with that. Obviously we use convert to and convert from JSON, and we can also cast as XML. So I quickly talked about in the demo there, I quickly showed you guys on how to obviously we did serializing and deserializing with JSON, but it's pretty much the same with XML. Now people can serialize and deserialize with XML different ways. So I can actually, pretty sure, actually no, I can't do that, but I can do this. So let's look at our hash table here. I'm just going to clear this. And then we can go, and we can just actually convert to XML. So you can convert to XML like that. If I just do, where is it? It's still cast as an XML. So if I go, I'm just having a massive memory blank because I generally don't do this often. Okay, yeah. So we convert it to XML. Now we actually need to save it. So I can actually just save it by using the save method. Obviously we can see it's in type XML. Now one of the things is that if you want to cast something as XML, there's two ways you can do it. You can create an XML object, or if you basically want to cast something, let's say you've got a string. Let's say this is some XML. Let's just say the string is some XML. You can actually just cast it by casting it. That's it. You don't even need to do anything else. That's going to fail because it doesn't. It's it's incorrect. But if you actually have legitimate XML as a string there, it'll cast it. That's really cool because I've seen a lot of people kind of try and do weird things the way you're doing. I'm just like, just cast it. Like, if it's XML, XML will understand it. So you don't. There's sometimes when you can just cast it and take a shortcut, and this is one of those times. And this is, yeah. So obviously, what else do we need to talk about? Obviously, we talked about converting to from JSON, but now we're basically getting to the good stuff. So we can actually go do some cool demos. So I'm going to probably have to go for a run. So this is going to be hilarious because I've got to get up, run downstairs, and use physical security on the Phillips Hue. But we'll get to that. So the next thing is basically we're going to jump into some demos. So one of the things that if you use Phillips Hue, like I've said before, Phillips Hue is basically a it's just a home automation system. As you can see in the background, I've got my Phillips Hue light there. It's green. And what it does is you can basically just control your lights through your app. It uses Zigbee as a method wireless communication from the hub to the lights. I actually didn't know, but it can penetrate walls really well. So that's really good to know because I might actually put some lights in up here, which is even better. I might even put some in Bub's room, which is even better. We can actually make a night light for her. So these are the kinds of things that Phillips Hue can do. Phillips Hue's hub is all REST based. So basically it has an open source API, which means you can interact with. So in this instance, we're going to be using PowerShell to interact with it. We can just quickly show you. I've just got a saved file. I didn't actually jump on the website. I've just got it saved. You can see that basically if you go to their website, Phillips Hue developer program, you need to sign up. You kind of got to jump through so many more hoops now, which is really kind of annoying. But one of the things about getting started with Phillips Hue is it's a really good platform to learn the basics of REST, because Phillips Hue use all the good principles of REST, the REST standard, and apply it to the API. Like I said before, the API, it's the Wild West out there. So you're going to see some really weird things if you're using. And like every time I go and hit it, I feel like I'm feeling confident in API. I learn, I'm feeling okay. I have a good grasp of the entire concept. I recently had to go pick up another API endpoint. Work with a client with another API endpoint, and it was one of the worst API endpoints I've ever had to work with. And the reason why was because there was the way that you had to authenticate, the way that you had to send queries to like the documentation, the queries, everything was just poor. Like it was written from a concept of a person who actually knew it, but they were unable to understand because they knew it. Then obviously a person who didn't know and understand it looked at it and gone, well, this doesn't make sense. So I spent about a day trying to work out how to get it to work, which is really annoying for me because usually, like this, for example, this documentation here, that took 20 minutes to literally get a working product ready from literally nothing to a working product in 20 minutes. And that was just me going through the documentation going, okay, these are the methods I need to use, this is what I need to do, and then just a bit of discovery with it after that, and then I'm done. I have my demo. So this is a really good foundation. It's one of the better documented products out there, but like I said, REST is the Wild West. There's some people out there that do some really weird things with REST. So obviously the first step is make sure my bridge is connected. So that would have helped earlier if I saw that step and I didn't realize my wife unplugged the bridge so she could vacuum. The second thing is basically we're going to now need to discover the IP address. Now we know the IP address, which is my 10.4.200.9. And we need to have a production app, blah, blah, blah. It uses universal plug and play to basically hit outside. It's blocked on my firewall because it is fairly insecure. Like this product is not the most secure, but at the same time though, it is what it is. So once you can do that, you can obviously connect to the bridge. And this is one of the things I love about when you're using with API endpoints. If it's properly documented, so you've got things like Microsoft Graph Explorer, there's a way for you to physically see the request and mess around with it. So if I quickly show you Microsoft Graph Explorer, so you can just Google it. This is one of my favorite sites because it shows you exactly what's happening. So you can see this is my URL. There's my method. That's the version. I can be like, okay, this is, me, so I can run the query. I don't think it's not connected to Microsoft, so it's going to give you demo stuff back. But basically, you can actually build your query. You can build your code much more effectively by using this than if you didn't have it. So obviously, Phillips Hue have it as well, which is really cool. So you can specify the URL. It's not as fully featured as Graph, but at least you can basically see what it's doing, and it's really important for debugging. So we're going to get started. So very first thing I need to do is I'm going to my demo. I'm actually going to open this up in the ISC because I'm just going to run specific lines at times, so I can actually, because this is a staged piece of code. So this was here. So I've got my IP address, so I'm just going to run that, drop that into memory. And now I'm going to basically authenticate with the controller. So as you can see here, I've got the request body, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to authenticate with my controller. So what I'm going to, this is where it gets a little bit fun for you guys to watch me tear out of the room, because I need to run downstairs and press a button on the actual physical, my hub. That basically is the only thing that is the security. So once I authenticate, I have 15 seconds to get downstairs, press the button, and then hopefully this process is fine. So what we can do, so what we're going to do here, so I'm just kind of rereading my code. So I'm using invoke REST method. So as you can see here, I'm just going to drop this in the body so we can see the body. There's my body, which is pretty straightforward. And then I'm doing an invoke REST method. And as you can see, the method is post. The reason why is I'm sending a request to the hub saying, hey, I want to authenticate. And the reason why we need to authenticate is because I need a key to be able to talk to the server. And I obviously don't remember my keys. I've got to probably go through and clean it up. But what we're going to do here is I'm just doing some string formatting here. So if I just quickly show you what it's going to look like, that's the URI that we're hitting. So we've got 10.4.200.9. And then all I'm doing is, as you can see, I'm just doing some string formatting there just to make it look a little bit more pretty. We have the body, which is basically, we're going to convert it to JSON. And then we're specifying the content type. So you remember how I talked earlier about the HTTP headers? Sorry, I just had a massive memory blank. The parameter content type allows you to define what that is. So invoke REST method is kind of giving us a few shortcuts here, so we don't actually have to physically put that inside the header, which is good because it means that it's just one less thing we have to do. Now, if we wanted to specify the header, all we need to do is actually just use the headers parameter, and then we can put the headers in there. So once we've got that, we've got our. So now I'm just going to give me 2 seconds. I'm going to open the door so I can run really quickly. And then we're going to tear downstairs and we're going to do this. So give me a moment. I'm just going to put my headphones down and I'm just going to mute them and we'll be back in a sec. Alright, let's see if that worked. I'm pretty sure I got down there. Oh no! Okay, I'm going to do this again, 1 sec. Let's see if that works. I think I've got to go the other way. I think. Oh, look at that. Sweet. Cool. Okay. Oh, that was fun. Alrighty, so once we've done that, we now have our username, and that's basically, in essence, it's our password that we need to authenticate with. So I just wrote some extra code in here, but realistically we don't need to use that. So the next thing is we can actually enumerate what all the lights are. So if we go have a look at the documentation, you can see in here, so if we're going to enumerate all the lights, turn lighting off and on, where is it? So we obviously done our authentication. Yeah. Okay, I can't find it. So where the hell did I put it? Core concepts. Don't log me in. I don't know what my login is. Let's see if I have it in here because I'm pretty sure I did. Oh, don't tell me I deleted it. I'm pretty sure I didn't. Aha. Okay, here it is. So if we're on numerator lights, we can just basically call this URL, and that's going to show us all our lights. So we're going to actually do that. So what we can do here is let's just jump back in. So in this instance, when I'm using invoke REST method, and this is just something I've used from best practices within PowerShell. This is best practice in PowerShell. If you're doing a really, really long lines in terms of you've got a really long one-liner that you're just running a single commandlet, it's better to use PowerShell splatting. And PowerShell splatting, all it is, you're defining a hash table like so, and what you're doing is the hash table key defines the parameter name, and then the value obviously is the parameter value. So obviously invoke REST method contains the URI parameter and then the method parameter and the content type. So I'm just going to call that. I'm just going to bring that into memory. So again, we can just pop that out. You can see down there that it's in memory. Following that, we basically have, we can actually invoke the method. So in this instance, we're going to run it. I actually want to backtrack quickly for 1 second. Now you can see that we have userdetails.success.username. So what I've just done here, remember that's my username. So when we're crafting the query, I just quickly want to show you the URI so you can see. So this is how the URI is built. So like I said, you got OAuth, you got OAuth 2.0, then you have Phillips Hue. Phillips Hue doesn't really use OAuth 2.0 or anything like that. So the way it works is that you just have this in essence this route set up, which is kind of weird if you think about it, but that's how it does it. So if we go back to the documentation, we can see that there because you've got API/username, and username is that response code. So remember, this is the user details that we just got, and that's the username. So that's what we're doing to get how we basically were authenticating with our API endpoint. So following that, basically we're going to, we've run our enumerated lights, so we can actually just dump that out. And you can see here, I've got a whole bunch of data out back from it. And this is all, this is one of the really cool things about invoke REST method, is when it responds back with JSON, it'll actually automatically deserialize it for us. So you can serialize the JSON in the body, but then when the body comes back, invoke REST method will do it for us, which is fantastic because it means that that's one less step I have to do. So the guys at Microsoft were kind of thinking back and go, well, you know, it is going to deserialize. We might as well just deserialize it for them. Like, that just makes sense. So obviously we got our this is obviously a if we can actually, this is just an object. So if we can do a get member, you can see it's a PS custom object, and you can see that each of those properties 1 to 7 are basically objects in essence. Now it doesn't, if let's say on the server it had type information, a specific type, that type information is completely gone. Like, we'd have to physically reconstruct it, but realistically that's, yeah, it's just not, in this instance this is not needed, but it's just worth noting. The next thing is that basically, so we can see our lights. Now we're going to be using Lounge Room 7, which is that light there. We're basically going to be doing some cool things with it. So in this instance, what we're going to be doing here is we're now going to enumerate all the lights. Yep. We're going to get some information about that explicit light. So this thing is really detailed. Like, you can get a lot of information about it. So we're going to just use the same thing. We've got the URI, we've got the lights. We're saying we want to get specifically light number 7. Obviously specifying the Hue controller IP address and the user authentication. As you can see, it's a get method, so there's nothing really special there. We're just saying, hey, give me some data. So we're going to run that, and we're going to get some cool stuff back. So we can actually see here, we can see whether the state is. So, and that, remember, so if you see an @ thing like that, it's still an object. So that's still legitimate. So I can go @ there's my state. I can see that it's turned on, the brightness, the hue, the saturation, the effect. The XY, we'll talk about them. The XY is not positional. It's basically Phillips Hue got this really weird kind of XY, like uh, it's basically like a it's a really weird way of doing light colors. So the X and the Y position determine what kind of color it is, and it's not something that is like uniform. So you don't have red, blue, green. It's actually on a graph, like it's on a like a specific like a sine wave. In essence, it's actually, yeah, it's on a sine wave roughly. So, but that's obviously all included in the documentation. So if we scroll down here, I think it's actually down here. They had it somewhere. I remember looking at it going, yeah. So the XY coordinates is the color in a CIE color space. So I'll just quickly, yeah. So that's just obviously what I'm talking about. But you can see each of these properties, it's actually documenting what it's talking about. So the brightness of the light, BRI, the hue of the light is that, so the hue and saturation values are dependent on the programming. The saturation, the XY, the myriad color temperature. So you can see all the types that you can cast as well. So you got an integer 16. Is it? I don't want a unit. Anyway, alert changes, things like that. So I can actually specify alerts on these things. We can do really cool things. So these are so if I send an alert, it'll actually do something. It'll, like, we can make it flash and do cool things with it. And then things like that. So you can see these sample responses. So this is what I'm talking about within documentation. It's really good to have that documentation because it means that you can basically you can obviously get up and running better, and like it means that discovery is a lot more enjoyable. I can tell you now, like when you're doing discovery on a product that doesn't really document well, it's quite difficult. So obviously we've got some information on it. Let's turn the light off. So now we know the information, we've got the state of it, so we know it's true. We can actually turn it off. Now when we want to change something in a REST, in this instance we're not creating anything new, so we're just going to use a put. That's basically what the documentation says. So if we want to set a light attribute, it's a put. So and it sounds a little bit weird. So actually no, yeah, that's correct. And that's a rename. A set light state. It's a put. So what we can do here is in our response here, we've basically said the method is a put. The body is and then we're basically inside the body, we're basically saying the property that we want to change, which is on, we want to change that to off. Now what's really funny here is that realistically you only should need to specify the properties that you want to change. However, that doesn't happen. There's an API I was working with, which is D2L. It's instant. The way that it works, if you do any sort of put or you do a patch or a post, actually no, it's more a put or a patch. If you're sending those those requests back and you don't actually specify the entire object that it's expecting, it'll just throw an error. And it's really frustrating because puts basically, realistically, you only need to specify what you need to change. That's best practice. However, in this instance, it's not. So, like I said, REST is the Wild West. You really need to be careful. So in this instance, I can specify the fact that I can specify the changed item and exclude everything else. But in other instances, no, that's not going to be the case. So what we can do now is let's turn that light off. So I'm just going to define those parameters. If you have any questions as well, don't be afraid to ask. I've got a bit of time, so I'm actually running a little bit early, which is even better. So if you've got a lot of questions, just start firing them off. At the same time, obviously we got invoke REST. We're going to obviously invoke that method again. We're going to have a look at the results. So you can see lights turned off. I don't know if you saw that. I actually definitely didn't because I'm not looking that way, but light turned off. So we've actually did our response, and we can actually see what the response it's going to send back. And what it's going to send back is the state, and you can see that under the property name is success. So we know that it was fine. Now if there's an error, it might return with a property name called error. In this instance, obviously we've got the property name success. We can see the state, it's set to false. Happy days. So we're going to turn the light back on now. So all we're going to do is change the state to true. Now remember, this is a Boolean true. This is not string true. This is a Boolean true. So that's another thing you got to remember when you're specifying items within there. So you need to preserve the type. So what I mean by that is if we quickly scroll back up there, you can see how we've got the name on, which is what we're working on in terms of the property here, the boolean, we need to preserve that type. So obviously PowerShell's boolean is $true or $false, but we wouldn't actually say string true, string false. That would actually cause an error. So you need to preserve the type. That's really important. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn the light back on. So let's run that and turn it back on. I should see that in the video. Yep, and there we go. Green's back on the background. So you can see there that basically you can turn it on and off. It's really quite cool. So the next thing we can do now is we can actually set our light colors. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to set our red, green, and blue. So obviously we've got our green. Red that's the color for red. I'm not gonna really spend much time going into the details here, but basically what we can do is we can define colors and do things with it. So in this instance, we're going to set the state. It's a put. We're going to make sure we turn it on. It's always good to have it turned on because you might have it like it will still accept a red request to change it to red if it's off. It'll still do that. Like that's fine, but it like obviously you can't see it. So we also got the brightness of 200. I'm just going to change that to 256 so we can actually see everything here. And we're going to turn that back on. So if we can turn that back, we're going to run that code. Haven't. Did that run? I did run it. Oh, sorry, I actually didn't run it. I built the parameter set and then I did. So if we run it, does that turn red? No, it's not. Ooh, now we get to troubleshoot. Oh, okay. It helps if I set red. I actually need to set all these values like so. Okay. Now that should work. Yep, there we go. Now it's turned to red. So as you can see there, that's basically, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. Like, it's all REST based, so we're actually just interacting with it programmatically. But now, like, obviously we can do cool things with it. And really, the sky's your limit. Like, you could do things like, so if you get a Facebook alert on your phone, you could have that flash. Well, to be honest, I wouldn't do that. But let's say let's say I'm downstairs or I'm upstairs and I'm getting a phone call. That could start flashing and I'll be like, oh no, I'm getting a phone call. So you can do basically your REST interface pretty much enables you unlimited access to this product. So obviously, there's a lot of apps out there that do most of these things, but obviously in this instance, we're gonna just kind of you can pretty much do whatever you want. So one of the things I could do is actually we're going to change it to blue. Obviously we've seen green, so just going to change I'm going to change it to blue there, like so. And if we run it, we'll see it turn to blue. It's pretty straightforward. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to do we're going to do tests with pings. So in this instance, what we've got here is we've got an alert set up. So I've created a body using the documentation here. So we're going to create an alert, which is an alert effect which creates a temporary change of the bulb state. This can take one of the following values: none, light's not performing an alert effect, select the light's performing a one brief cycle, or an L select, which is what we're doing is performing brief cycles for 15 seconds or until another alert happens, or sorry, an alert none happens. Command is received. So what we're doing here is we're saying an alert L select, so it's going to basically breathe in and out for 15 seconds, and we're basically just doing a random color. So I'm just doing a get random between that number and that number. Brightness is 200. I'm going to turn it fully up, and we're just going to run this code. Now this is obviously what it's going to do is if the ping doesn't work, we can see that it's going to flash this, and we're just going to run this forever. So it's doing a ping to that IP, which it doesn't exist, and we should actually see it fail, and then this should start flashing. So I've actually put verbose mode on here as well. So you can see there it's flashing. So these are just cool things that we can do with the API. So you can imagine if you could have if you're in an office space, let's say hypothetically, and you've got service downs and things like that, you could have literally this basically do a notification, like a visual notification, so someone can see a light is flashing, around in a knock or something like that, and they know something's not right with it. So these are this is basically what we can do with this kind of thing. So you can see again, it's failed. It's going to notify us, and if it's a different color. So we've got a solid pink now. Oh, it's quite bright actually, which is really nice. So one of the things we're going to do now is I'm just obviously going to set the IP address of it, and we can see that 4.200.200.9 we change it back to 200.9, it won't do anything because it exists. I think, is it 200.9? Yeah. So that obviously will do a testnet connection. I think I'm doing a really sloppy testnet connection as well. I really should just be sending one packet. But as you can see, it's just like it's not doing anything because the product is the host is up. So that's pretty much that. The thing is, most of the people can do really cool things with music and things like that. So I'm just going to start up in an Explorer. I'm going to hopefully, actually we can just run this. I'm going to have a nice YouTube ad because that's always fun. So obviously, it's going to probably do that. It's probably going to play an ad. Yep, here we go. Here's the ad.
Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
I'm just going to skip that. So basically, like, obviously we've got a bit of music there. I'm not going to play it too loud so Twitch doesn't get up me for it. And we can basically just flash lights. Like, you can actually do really cool things with it. So, so you can see the obviously we can actually create disco effects and things like that. As you can see, there's no actual beat detection on this, so it's just basically using timers. But realistically, if you were going to make some sort of disco thing, like, I had a concept where you could actually build a lighting station out where you could have like, you could have all your lights defined, and then basically you could actually specify beats per minute, fade effects, and basically literally drag lights and have sliders like the traditional lighting effects board. So and that's pretty much that in terms of demos. So Hue API, definitely recommend it. It's really cool. So I'm just going to stop that so it doesn't kick me off for it. But basically you can see that's Hue. So I really kind of want to take this to the next level now. So one of the things I wanted to obviously show you guys is what I do professionally at work when it comes to REST APIs, because traditionally when you have a multi-layer architecture where you have your traditional, you have a multi-layer approach. So you have your traditional approach is what we're doing here. Is we're just doing a REST here and there, which is fine for your one-offs. When you're running production scripts and codes, you're going to need to start catering for 100% up or 99.9% uptime. So you need to start writing. You need to. Man, my nose is so itchy. You need to write code that basically can support that. And then on top of that, you need to go to the next level. So you need to support, like within PowerShell 5, you need to support pagination. So anything from 3 to 5, you need to support pagination. Anything after 5, so that's 6 to 7, so that's your .NET PowerShell core, that automatically supports pagination. But what you need to do there is you need to support a lot more content surrounding the actual request to make sure that that's how you expect the response. So one of the things I've done is, if I'll just jump into back to Visual Studio Code, this is this is a piece of production code I wrote for work for a specific module which is called D2L. I'm not going to even go in between into the classes behind it because we'll literally be here all day. But the way that this module works is it needs to cater for multiple types of authentication. It needs to cater for what happens if you, that's one thing I forgot, token refreshes. I'll mention that in a second. It needs to cater for token refreshes. It needs to cater for a lot more content. It needs to be able to issue retries if the service is unavailable. It needs to be able to have an exponential back off. Those kinds of things are really important. So as you can see here, I've got an invoke D2L handle. Now I could actually write this as a proxy function in PowerShell. So what I could have done is created a proxy function for invoke REST method, and then just basically pack this all into it. The only reason why I didn't is because in this instance, this is not the best method for it. I could add the extra support for pagination and all that kind of stuff into the proxy method. The proxy method. But in this instance, this specific piece of code is not best suited for it. It's best suited in its own function. So what we've got here is, so obviously I've got a whole bunch of parameters set up within PowerShell. I'm doing script validation, and this is basically all this. The way that this product works is that the module, you have your commandlet up here. The commandlet only needs to talk to this specific function, this function here, and then this function does everything. it's a bit like it's a bit like any sort of stack that you build. So it's your traditional stack. This stack goes deep too. This is the second level of like level 4. There's like 4 levels of stack in terms of the way that it's doing things, the way that it's handling stuff. But in this instance, basically, the way the commandlet works is it just crafts, it has the URL. It basically doesn't need to know about the authentication. All the things it needs to know about is the URL and the data that it needs to send. So if it's saying, I want to get this user, this is the user that I'm sending, this is the URL, this is the body, this is the, sometimes if it needs to specify the header, it'll specify the header, but that's pretty much it. Like, it doesn't need to do much else. Underneath that, this basically talks to all the deeper levels and then basically builds the configuration needed to talk to the API endpoint. And this is what I'm talking about, a stack. So basically, the reason why I've done it this way is because the commandlets, if we're looking at a commandlet, which I can't show you for intellectual property, for IP concerns, but the commandlet is literally it's literally 100 lines of code, and I would say half of that is like white space. So let's say it's 50 lines of code. All it's doing is building the URL or the URL out, building out according to building the body out, and that's it. And then it's handing all that off to this. So it means I can build commandlets really quickly, and I don't have to worry about all the deeper level. And that's really important, because if I had to go the other way, for example, with this specific API endpoint, I would be here all day and I'll just be recycling code over and over again, and that's really bad. So, and obviously for supportability, it's just even like it's an absolute nightmare. And obviously I have to deal with authentication and things like that. So the commandlet would then grow to about 1,000 lines each. So that's just it's just not worth it. So this piece of code allows me to infinitely extend the functionality, provided that the API supports it. So obviously we're going to go down here. So there's a whole bunch of different things it can do, but I'm just going to quickly go through some basic things. So it needs to support multiple APIs. So we're talking about the old API, which is what we call Valance, and the new one. Because it's supporting the different types of authentication, the code underlying it needs to be able to basically go, okay, you're Valance, you're OAuth, you're Valance, you're OAuth. So it's able to handle between the two quite well. If it's OAuth, one of the things I did forget to mention is refresh tokens. So with OAuth 2.0 or OAuth 2.0, the token will eventually expire. And what happens is when you get a token, you'll get a bearer, what we call the bearer property, which is basically your token. You're going to get the expiry time. You're going to get a whole bunch of different stuff. The one token that you need is the refresh token. So when the token expires, that refresh token allows you to get a new token without having to go through the whole OAuth authentication process again. Now, for automation underlying it, that's really useful, because we need to maintain that automation perspective. If that breaks, automation breaks. So that refresh token needs to be able to go and get a new one. Now, one of the things here, for example, with an automation, you need to start thinking about how do I manage multiple instances running, these kinds of things. So you need to maintain a configuration that's able to support multiple instances concurrently writing to it, concurrently reading it. How do let's say you've got 10 instances running and the refresh token expires at one of those points in time. One of them needs to get the refresh token while the others need to be smart enough to wait. So you need to be able to start writing code that's smart enough to be able to handle that. And this is what the underlying deeper frameworks of this specific layer, which is, remember, this is the second layer. That's like the third and the fourth layer. That's what that supports. Actually, it's the fourth layer. That's how it handles all that for you. And this is really important, because for a commandlet, for a module, you're just like, the moment I type in import module D2L, which is this module here, basically when the module is loaded into memory, check all that, everything, 100% everything is done. And so by the time the module is loaded, then basically you are ready to run your commandlets. Now you have to remember that's running concurrently. So I could have 10 concurrent modules. Let's say during that 10 concurrent processes, the token expires, it will go get a new refresh using the refresh token. We'll go get a new token and then bring that back in. So, and then obviously the others are smart enough to wait for that response to come back. So these are the things where you like what I'm talking about in terms of scalability and obviously making it more suitable for the production space. So as you can see here, what I've got here is I'm talking about what kind of authentication. So if it's a OAuth authentication, it will refresh the configuration each time it invokes this method. And the reason why it does that is because it needs to make sure that the most current configuration is up to date. So for whatever reason, let's say you have two concurrent processes sitting side by side. This process has basically been sitting there for the last half hour. It hasn't been running any commandlets, but this one has, and you've been doing stuff on it. Token expires, you get a new refresh token, it updates the configuration, and you go then run something on that. Technically speaking, in memory, you have two different values. So this one needs to make sure that it has always the latest and most up-to-date version of the configuration. So that's why we're refreshing it. Valance, the authentication for Valance with D2L doesn't require that. The reason why is because it's per session. So when I authenticate, I actually physically have to log in. There's no way around it. So at the end of the day, though, like when you using Valance, you're logging in. Like that's it. So obviously we're checking the authenticated state. So obviously it's looking at this. There's properties within the object. What we call the D2L controller object, and within that it's basically calling this method called test authentication. Now there's properties within each of the authentications to say whether the item has been authenticated or not, and this is just checking that. It can bypass it, and this is really important because basically again you get faced with a chicken and the egg scenario. When you have got your token, you need to test whether it's working or not. If the token is not working, then you obviously know something's not right. So the best way to check it, on most systems, you're going to have like a who am I, a me. Get something. I just want to see if something comes back. That's all I care about. And so this is what that does. So when it creates it for the very first time, it does a check, and this check basically bypasses the authentication because it's not authenticated yet, and it will run the check. Once it is authenticated in the method, once after it's called this, it will then set it. So again, chicken and the egg. We're now constructing the URI. I'm not going to go in complete detail here, but Valance's URI construction again to OAuth is completely different. So, excuse me, I've got a really dry throat. So basically constructing a URI, I'm just going to call this method. So I'm offloading all these to the deeper functions, to the classes underneath that's supporting this. I'm building my parameters out, and obviously I'm building my authorization. So the authorization, this is basically the header. This is what I was talking about. So if it's the type authentic, if it's OAuth, if it's OAuth, basically we're going to use the authorization header. That's basic standard for any sort of REST authorization, with the exception to Valance, because Valance is different. Again, remember, REST is the Wild West. So basically I'm constructing it, and then based from that, obviously I have my header built out. And all I'm doing here is I'm actually just, because this is one of the things I love about hash tables, I'm just adding to it. So if it's not needed, then I don't need to actually add the property to the parameters, and that is going to get splattered into invoke REST method. That's all I'm doing, is just building out a really complicated invoke REST method parameter set and then splatting it in. So then following that, I'm building out my body. I'm building out my headers. Append REST header to the parameters if specified. If REST header. Okay, so if I've specified a header in the parameter up the top of the function or the commandlet, it will append it into it. So it's adding items into it if it needs to. And that basically calls this method, which allows it to do that. So I've actually built a method that basically takes the two key value pairs and then joins them together. We're basically now appending key values to the end of the URI. This is based, it's just specific to the API. I'm defining my result collection. So I'm actually using an array list. It's faster. So that's the reason why, especially when you're using big collections, you're getting a lot of data. I'm trying to make it as fast and efficient as possible. Bookmark is it pertains to the pagination. So I'm basically saying there's no bookmark. I'm also setting a back off timer, which is set to 2. That's an initial. However, up here I can actually specify my retry limit, and it basically is it's an exponential back off, so it will actually slow down longer and longer and longer. Everything is encapsulated inside a try catch, and obviously I'm using lots and lots of verbosing. Now you can see here I've got write verbose log. Don't worry about that, it's still write verbose, but I'm basically this module has a capacity to do debug logging. So when I was troubleshooting the specific issues with authentication, I needed to write extensive logging to get my full understanding of why it was failing, which was an absolute headache. And then basically this is an advanced commandlet, so it supports what if. And then basically from that I can actually eventually I do an invoke. And you can see there's still a lot more after the invoke. I need to check whether it's if there's a bookmark, if I need to go to the next bookmark. This is the whole pagination support. And basically after that, if there's no recursion, okay, I'm basically doing, oh man, otherwise test to see there's no recursion at all. Yep, that's the case. I'm setting a break flag, testing if, so I'm basically saying it to break out. Test if paging info is present. So what I'm doing there is I'm testing to make sure that this is the things. These are just the little ins and outs for D2L. Sometimes some result sets come back with inside an item's properties. Other times they come back with on its own in the actual body. So yeah, so what it's doing is just looking at the two. If it's an items, use items. If it's not, then use the other. So it's just things like that. And then it's throwing it back. It'll throw terminating errors if it needs to. So if there's any sort of weird errors, it'll break. Obviously support for that. This is basically the catch. So this is really where if something is going wrong. So we're looking at all those status codes. So I'm getting status codes, and then I'm just looking at your 301s. 301s, obviously token is expired in this instance. I'm going to refresh my token. If it's Valance, I'm just going to create a new authenticated URI. So that's just that. You can see it's quite detailed. So basically I'm rebuilding the header, a lot of stuff that needs to go on there. Obviously 400, it's just going to, all these are just generally just going to respond with the message back. And then from that we're going to actually start this. What this is actually doing is it is handling the retry. If it's hitting a limit, it's basically writing back to the user that there was an error and it's trying again. That's pretty much it, and you can see it's an exponential, so we've got a back off timer, which is multiply. It's basically a multiplier of this number. That's pretty much it. I think, yeah, in terms of, as you can see, that's quite extensive. That's what, 389 lines of code, which is quite extensive. That's not none of the supporting libraries underneath it. But that's basically a good example of what you need to do to basically bring it into production line. So you need to start thinking super robust, like in terms of, I need to make my code as robust as possible. Now, you're never going to make it 100% robust. There's always going to be issues. However, you need to make your code as best as you can, as robust as you can, so that when it does come to an issue, it's able to handle it. Because at the end of the day, if it's able to handle it, then you have no issue. If it's not, well, then you've got problems. So that's pretty much that in terms of my talk. Actually, I think I'm pretty much running ahead of time. Yeah, I'm. Okay, yeah. So, any questions? Yeah. So if you've got any questions, definitely start firing them through now, because realistically, I really want to. If you got, like, I've got a ton of time, so I can answer any questions or any concerns. There's anything that if you're having any issues, we can kind of have a bit of a chat about it now. So, yeah, fire them through. Why do that? I'm just gonna close this down. Actually, I just realized there was one thing I didn't do, which was the Hue Developers API. So I'm just going to chat that through. But if you just go, you can just Google it. So yeah, basically we just need to sign up. Completely free. I'm just going to chat that through. But yeah, that's so if you got questions, yeah, fire them through. It's really good. Obviously, and obviously any feedback as well. That's really good as well. I think that's pretty much it in terms of. I don't think there's anything else to cover. If yeah, so I'll just hang around for a little bit more, and then basically, if you have any questions, yeah, just start firing them through. Or alternatively, you can just send me a PM via Twitch or through YouTube. While I'm doing that, I'm going to close some bits and pieces down. All right, cool. No worries. Actually, it was really clear and helpful. Oh, cool. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I use REST at work with some DSC stuff. Yeah. What kind of DSC stuff do you use in terms of? Because that's always something that like obviously I'm really wanting to get into like. I'm really wanting to obviously start really pushing DSC in my workplace. So I'm kind of like I'm obviously like I've studied a little bit about it, but I kind of need to like I really need to get my teeth stuck into it. There was a couple of live streams that I did previously about DSC and automating WordPress, but I'm kind of still humming and hawing about it. But I'm obviously I like coming out of DSC. I just love it. So yeah. But so what do you use for DSC? Like what like how do you use REST and DSC at the same time? I'll do that. I'm like, I got a mail message. No, I don't. Oh, actually, I do, but I'm not gonna read it now. All right. Yeah, I think what we might do is I'm just gonna stay on for a little bit longer. I'm happy to chat. But I think like maybe I might think about jumping off soon. So I'm pretty much done. So thanks for joining us. But now I'm just gonna pretty much just QA and just chat. So yeah. You know what I might do quickly? I'll just have a quick squiz on PowerShell.org, see if there's anything interesting to talk on. Ah, okay, interesting. So basically is your API script that calls start DSC configuration. Ah, have you thought about using like MongoDB? Ah, okay. Yep, yep, okay. So, yep, okay. I was thinking, have you obviously using DSC? Have you thought about using automation, Azure Automation for DSC, or the API runs a group management service account? And the API runs as a group managed service account. Yeah, nice, nice, nice. Because one of the reasons I was just going to say that is because I'm planning to with my machines within DSC. I'm gonna trial my WordPress machines, and then from that, I'm actually like my wife's computer. Um, she's running 10 now, so I'm thinking of basically enrolling all my machines on my network in automation, and then basically just having DSC configuration set up for um, all my like core content. So I've got like I use Sophos. I got a Sophos UTM, so I've basically got authenticators running on each machine. And yeah, I should put them on the domain, but realistically, I'm kind of waiting for the XG series firewalls to kind of start supporting Azure Active Directory and identity through that. So then basically, I can just run right. I don't even need to use it anymore. And then just basically implement Azure Active Directory, and then just the basic, and then basically have users log on that way. So while I do that, I'm just going to mute that. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things that oh, okay. API runs as a group service, but yes, first before going to cloud solutions, we want to build the basics. We want to get our feet wet. Yeah, nice. One of the things that next month Wayne will be live streaming it, but Wayne, my colleague, Wayne's a really good mentor. Wayne's basically going to do a DSC talk. And Wayne's really, especially where he's working at Ozscripts, he's really pioneered the DSC configuration enrollment into Azure. So it's going to be really good talk. I'm actually really looking forward to that talk because obviously DSC is something I'm wanting to push as well. At the same time, I'm about to buy the big book of DSC by wasn't the big book of DSC, but the ongoing the never-ending book of DSC by Don Jones and the other lady. I can't remember her name. And so it's yeah, I'd really recommend you guys if you're not you can join our Slack channel as well. We generally throw a lot of content up there. So what I can do is I'll send you an invite because realistically yeah, we're generally fairly active on here. So I'll send you an invite to the Brisbane PowerShell user groups Slack channel. And usually what we do is we're going to throw, we generally throw a lot of our, we're kind of out of a website at the moment. So we're, we've taken ourselves off Meetup because it just costs too much. So we're just using Slack to kind of manage everything at the moment. But what we're going to plan to do is running a, like obviously my DSC configuration is going to be using for WordPress is to run the PowerShell, BrisPug PowerShell website. But yeah, I've got to actually pull my finger out and get that done. So I've got so many projects I've got to do. It's not funny. Like I was planning to do another project this week, and I've actually got to write a blog post for work, but I haven't actually had time to do that. So yeah, it's just never ending in terms of projects. But I'm hoping to get that done. That link will basically get you in Slack. And then you can obviously you'll basically see under there we'll have a whole bunch of information about when the next meetup is. You'll see nice little graphics and things like that. And definitely definitely jump on board, and because then you can obviously see the next talk, which will be on DSC, which is we'll be live streaming it as well. So that'll be really good. But anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there. It's really good. It's really good for you guys to join. Thank you very much about IT. Hope you subscribe, and obviously you really enjoyed it, which is really good. Thank you. And we'll hope to see you next time. I'm probably going to be streaming. I usually stream Wednesdays, which is PowerShell 101 with Michael and Christian. Christian wasn't available on this week because he's trying to get ready for TAFE next week. But we basically should be back on board next week. If not, it's going to be DSC configuration with me. And then basically I might be doing another stream on Saturday again, but I'm not sure what it's going to be about. It might be more DSC. Or alternatively, I might be picking up my new project. I do have so many projects on the go at the moment. One of my projects, obviously, I'm going to kind of branch out into the gaming space. So I'm going to be basically working on revisiting with hopefully with a couple of the PowerShell guys with a bit of a hackathon, PowerShell aimbot for Battlefield 4. Or alternatively, it'll be PowerShell.org. I'll have a look at that for the forums again. I generally don't really go on much because it kind of frustrates me a little bit. At the same time, it might there's so many different things I've got going. I just don't want to particularly put all I don't want to particularly lose or drop them, juggle too many and then drop them all. So yeah, we'll just keep it. It'll probably be PowerShell.org. I'm not particularly keen at the moment to do that, and it'll probably most likely be all DSC. So anyway, thank you guys for joining. I hope you guys liked it. Don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, I hope to see you guys next time. Anyway, bye for now.